Today is April 14th, and I'm reading from the final chapter of the Gospel of John, John chapter 21. This passage is an interesting finality to this entire discourse on Jesus' death and his resurrection. And as we get to hear, it's an interesting event because Jesus, who has appeared on two other occasions after his resurrection, now is going to surprise a couple of his disciples as they have gone fishing. So Jesus is going to show himself to them again. So they're going out fishing, and Peter and John are there, and but Jesus shows up, and he's on the shore, and he hollers out, as it says in the fourth verse, and he says to them, "Children, have you any food?" And so they said, obviously they've been fishing, they haven't caught anything. Well, Jesus says to them in verse 9, cast your nets on the other side, and you're going to find some. So they cast their net, and of course, they're not able to draw this enormous catch of fish. Now, I don't know about you, but who do you suppose immediately they suspect that this is? And why would they? Because this is a flashback to an event where Jesus specifically had instructed Peter in his very infant stage of discovery of who Jesus was. And so Peter, after that happened, came to awareness that, I'm a wicked man, get away from me. And it was the beginning of his journey with Jesus. Well, Jesus, it's a replay. They're out fishing, and then Jesus shows up and he tells them, put your nets on the side, and they have this tremendous catch of fish, and immediately they know, hey, this is the Lord. And Peter, you can see Peter, he just leaps into the water, and but obviously, they're anxious to get over there to where Jesus is. Well, when they get there to where Jesus is, the Bible tells us in verse 10 or verse 9 that Jesus already prepared a fire, and he had fish laid on, bread laid on. Isn't it amazing that Jesus, in the resurrection, that he's concerned for breakfast for his boys? And I like it because sometimes people have this idea that in the resurrection, when we go to heaven, that this is going to be a bland and boring life. And yet the things that we enjoy here are going to be magnified so much more there. Jesus, who'd already engaged and enjoyed eating in his new resurrected body, now has prepared a meal that they will share together. So he's spending time with them. And it says that when they had eaten breakfast, verse 15, what do you suppose was the conversation? I don't know. I just envisioned that there was a little bit of an awkwardness. There was maybe some silence. What do you say to a dead man who's come alive? Or rather, what do you say to a man that you are responsible for abandoning and allowing him to take that journey all by himself? There's an awkwardness, a sense of their own failure and shortcoming. And so at the end of the breakfast, Jesus poses the question that we're so familiar with to Peter, do you love me? And then, Peter responds three times by saying, Lord, you know that I love you. But a second time, hey, Peter, do you love me? But he says the first time, feed my lambs. The second time, he says, hey, feed my sheep. And then the third time, Peter is somewhat, the word the Bible uses is grieved. He is disturbed because he says to him a third time, do you love me? And Peter says, Lord, you know everything, and you know that I love you. And Jesus said, then feed my sheep. And I think that in this discourse, Peter obviously has experienced a wide array of emotions and uncertainties, and yet Jesus, I don't think, is posing this question for information, obviously. But he is presenting the question to Peter, that Peter would now begin to verbalize his inner feelings, his inner convictions, his love of God. And Jesus is pulling it out of him. And he shares how much, and yet the responsibility, Jesus really saying this, that in that love, I want you to put it to action. I want you to take care of my lambs. I want you to take care of the sheep. I want you to, and so again, the question, and Peter of all people probably felt the most like the failure, because, he had boasted so much about how he would be with Jesus and he would die with Jesus. And then in the heat of the moment, he collapsed, he crumbled. And so he was all mouth, it was all words, but there was nothing to back it up. And so in this instance, Jesus already knew that Peter loved him. But in this moment, he's presenting it to Peter, and Peter is confessing. It's a declaration. It's decreeing that, yes, indeed, I love. And it was Jesus getting it from the inside to the outside, and then putting legs to it, and encouraging Peter, hey, this is where you're going, and this is what's going to direct you. And it's interesting to me that when Jesus rose from the dead, that he said, to the women, go tell the disciples and Peter, that it was very, very important that that Peter know of the immense love that Jesus had for him. And Jesus had every reason to chastise, discipline, correct, whatever you want to say, but he didn't. He loved them. And that's the kind of love that God has for you. And I believe the Spirit of God is always probing us and drawing out of us our love for Jesus. And it has to be combined with that of a public affirmation in which we say, yes, I love you. But it also has to be a demonstration of love where we are compelled to share that love with other people. Now, finally, when John's asking about Peter, in this last passage here around the 20th, 22nd verse, you can tell that maybe John, I don't know, it's interesting how John refers to himself as the other disciple. He always seems to want to be in the backdrop. He doesn't want to be in the forefront. So he doesn't even name himself. But I love the way that Jesus, when John brings out, Lord, the one who betrayed you, Peter. And Lord, what about that man? Okay. I like what Jesus said in verse 22. You follow me. And I think that sometimes we become so concerned about everybody else and the condition of everyone else that we don't practice the aspect about, hey, we'll follow Jesus. And God's going to take care of it. It's what Jesus said about we're concerned about the splinter that's in our brother's eye, but we fail to recognize the log that's in ours. And finally, I love that final verse, that if not everything is recorded. We don't have everything that Jesus did in his life. There's 30 years of Jesus' life we really know nothing about. There's miracles that aren't recorded. There are events that have transpired. There are words that Jesus shared. They're not recorded. They weren't for us to know, I guess. But the one thing that I love here is of which it says that if all of those were written, of all the things that Jesus did, that even the world could not contain all the books that would be written to record it. We serve an incredible God. And the fact is that we have a beautiful record of the accounts of Jesus. And so you have the eyewitnesses who were in the front row and saw with their physical eyes and handled Jesus. And then they wrote it down. And you and I have this precious record, infallible. It is anointed, it's inspired, preserved, that you and I can gain our hope and our faith can be built upon the promises of God. Hey, listen, today, may you walk with the certainty of the love of God for you, and may you take that love that he has for you, and may you share it with the world around you.